Okay, so today we're going to be talking about power off 180s. So what is a power off 180? The power off 180 maneuver is meant to simulate an engine failure in the traffic pattern. This is different from a normal landing because there is no power available to manage the glide path. The approach to land will be very different than a normal landing. It will most likely be steeper, tighter, and may require some maneuvering like slips or S-turns um, to account for any variance in the glide slope because we cannot use our power to correct for that. So why do we do this maneuver? This is just simulating an engine failure in the pattern, and this can also be applicable to any other engine failures. It's mostly to learn how to manage your energy without using power. So managing it with pitch, flaps, slips, stuff like that. So this is to develop skills that can be used to safely execute an emergency landing in a variety of confined areas. All right, so this is a list of the ACS skills. These are what you're going to be tested on for the check ride. So you want to make sure you complete the appropriate checklist, want to make radio calls as appropriate, plan and follow a flight path to the selected landing area considering altitude, wind, terrain, and obstructions. Select the most suitable touchdown point based on wind, landing surface, obstructions, and aircraft limitations. Position the airplane on a downwind leg parallel to the landing runway. You should be doing that. And correctly configure the airplane as necessary. Correlate crosswind with direction of forward slip and transition to side slip for landing. Touchdown at a proper pitch attitude with 200 feet beyond or on the specified point with no side drift. So for the power off 180, you cannot land before the point. You can land on the point or 200 feet beyond. So those are the tolerances for in the ACS. All right, so an important concept to understand for this maneuver is the best glide speed. This is when the lift to drag ratio is at its maximum. So there's going to be the minimum amount of drag. The best glide speed is an airspeed that will, in the absence of wind, result in the airplane traveling the furthest distance. Generally, the power off 180 should be flown at approximately the best glide speed. And in the Archer's case, this glide speed is 76 knots. And you want to fly it in a clean lowest drag configuration. So this means no flaps. Gear up for the majority of it if you're in a plane with retractable landing gear. And it's going to be important to trim to this best glide speed. So right off the bat, beginning the maneuver, you should be trimming to 76. Okay, setting up the maneuver. So you want to start with a normal pattern. So you want to request a short approach to ATC. If you're not already in the pattern, if you're coming in for a landing, when you make your initial call from 10 miles away, you can go ahead and request a short approach in that call. If you're in the pattern, then I would do it on the upwind or crosswind leg. You just want to give tower enough time to accommodate for the short approach because you're not going to be able to extend your downwind leg if you're doing this maneuver. So you want to make sure you request that from ATC as soon as possible. Then you're going to complete the before landing checklist as normal by the midpoint downwind. You just do this for every landing, just like a regular landing. Then when you're on the downwind leg, you want to choose a touchdown point. So this touchdown point should be within the first third of the runway. A good one that I like to use is the 1,000 footers or sometimes the third stripe. You don't want it to be too close to the beginning of the runway, just in case you land too short. You still want to be landing on the runway since we were just practicing this. So yeah, a good one for me is either the third stripe or the 1,000 footers are good reference points. But then you want to also choose an aiming point, which is you want to be about 500 feet before that. So a lot of times I will choose the third stripe and the numbers as my aiming point. Okay. Configure the entry. Entry should be at a normal pattern altitude, so 1,000 feet above the runway, and you should be at 5 to 10 knots below the maneuvering speed. So for the archers, a lot of times we'll use 90 knots, which is normal for being in the pattern. When you're abeamed the chosen touchdown point, you want to reduce the throttle to idle. This is simulating a loss of power. Maintain your altitude until you reach the best glide, which in our case is 76. And then it's really important at this point in the beginning of the maneuver to trim for this speed. This is going to help you out a lot in the rest of the maneuver, because as we discussed before,
You didn't have to leave a pod case out here, did you?
I did actually.
What's it look like?
It's pink.
Let's try it.
Yes, thank you so much.
There you go.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Where were we? Right. When abeam the chosen touchdown point, reduce the throttle to idle. This is simulating a loss of power or an engine failure when in the pattern. At this point, you should have some idea of the speed and direction of the wind. So, going back to before you enter this maneuver, you should have gotten the weather and you should have written down or bugged the wind direction. So based on this knowledge, you can begin planning the approach. Here are the setup steps that I would recommend writing down if you're having trouble remembering the procedure for this maneuver. So this is just kind of a shortened version of the setup for this maneuver. So request a short approach, maintain 1,000 above the runway at 90 knots, select a touchdown point in the first third and an aiming point about 500 feet before the touchdown point. When you're abeam the touchdown point, power to idle, maintain altitude until best glide, 76, is reached, and then pitch to maintain speed and trim for that speed. Okay, so when you're turning base, you want to think about the wind, and if you got a relatively strong wind, you're going to want to turn base early. Because if the wind is strong, the ground speed will be lower, resulting in less ground covered. So a strong ground speed would be I mean a strong wind would be anywhere from, I would say, 10 to 20 knots. Anything above like 12 would probably be a relatively strong wind. You're gonna want to turn earlier. Medium, about 10. If it's calm, if it's like below 5, if it's calm, you'll want to extend your downwind to avoid overshooting. All right, so when you're on your base leg, this is another key point where you're going to want to evaluate the approach and make necessary corrections. So you want to look out your window. This is easier when you're on a left traffic pattern, but you can also do it if you're on a right traffic pattern. You want to look at your aiming point that you chose when you were on the downwind leg, and you want to note any upward or downward movement of the point. It might move side to side, and that's normal. You can just ignore this. But if there is movement, you want to make the necessary corrections. If the point is moving down, that means the plane is getting too high, and you want to have a steeper glide path. So for this, you can use flaps, adjust the airspeed, and you do this to increase the approach length. If the point is moving up, that means the plane is getting too low. Don't use flaps, even though they add lift, they also will increase your sink rate. You want to make sure you're maintaining the best glide speed, so you want to double check your speed, make sure you're getting that 76 knots, and then if your point is significantly high, which means that your plane is getting too low, then I would turn directly towards the point. So you want to just go ahead and turn final at that point. So yeah, if you're too low, you can cut the corner, like I just said. So instead of making a 90-degree turn, you can just cut straight to final. But if you're too high, then continue the base leg and turn 90 degrees to final. If you're landing with a crosswind, and the crosswind is a tailwind, then the plane's tendency is to be high. So this is just something to keep in mind. The plane will not lose as much altitude because of the higher ground speed. And this is the opposite if you are going to have a headwind on the base leg. All right, so once you turn final approach, you are going to do your guns checklist like normal: gas, undercarriage, mixture, prop, seatbelts. And you're going to evaluate the approach once more and make the necessary adjustments to reach the final aiming point. Flaps may be used to increase the descent rate and slow the airplane to the landing speed. But remember, even though flaps increase lifts, they will result in a lower airspeed and increase sink rate. Therefore, they should not be used when you are too low. But you can use flaps when you're closer to the ground to balloon or float further. Only do this on very short final. If your approach is extremely unstable, just go around. All right, so when you're on final and you're looking at your aiming point, when you're in a stable descent, your aiming point should not be moving. So if it is moving, you can make corrections for that, but don't wait for large movements. You want to stay ahead of the aircraft, so be proactive and make very slight adjustments based on the movements of your aiming point. Up and down drafts might result in the approach being high one instant and low another, so you just want to be making constant adjustments for this. If the aiming point is moving up, the landing is going to be short, and you can remedy this by confirming your airspeed is at the best glide, 76. Don't put in any flaps. So if you've already put in flaps, that's okay, but don't put in any more to give your plane lift, because like we said, it's going to increase your sink rate. And then also be prepared to go around at this point. If the aiming point is moving down, we can do more with this. You always want to be higher than lower, because we can work with that. You can remedy this by adding flaps, which will increase your sink rate, or performing a slip. All right, so a slip is used when the plane is above the glide slope, like we just talked about. And you can perform this by using your ailerons. You want to lower the wing on the side in the direction that you want to slip. So if there's a crosswind, bank into the wind to control the drift. And as you bank into the wind, you want to simultaneously yaw the airplane's nose into the opposite direction by applying opposite rudder. So if you're banking to the left, you're applying right rudder. And this is assuming that there is wind coming from the left. This will cause more drag without increasing speed, which will allow us a steeper glide slope if we need that. All right, so your touchdown and flare is pretty similar to your normal touchdown. You want to make a normal landing at the proper touchdown attitude, or and you want to make this at or within 200 feet beyond the touchdown point. Remember, the plane will glide approximately 400 to 500 feet from your aiming point. So the aiming point you chose should have been about 500 feet below your touchdown point. So this should be okay. While spot touchdowns are important, a properly executed approach to landing is essential to the maneuver. So don't sacrifice a good approach in landing just to hit the spot. Don't force the plane on the ground, and don't try to stretch the glide. It might result in a hard landing or a stall, which can be dangerous, and we want to avoid that at all costs. So if you don't make your touchdown point, it is not the end of the world, but you want to try your best. Maintain directional control with rudder while slowly applying the necessary crosswind correction. So in this picture, we have a good representation of someone not correcting for the wind versus someone correcting for the wind. So you want to land with your main gear that's closest to the direction of the wind landing first. And then don't apply brakes until completely on the ground and use equal pressure on both brakes to avoid swerving. Here's some common errors that students a lot of times make when doing the proper 180. Failure to establish approach and landing configuration at proper time or proper sequence. Another big one is not getting ahead of the plane, waiting until your aiming point's way off and trying to make drastic corrections. You're just gonna end up playing tag with the plane. Improper use of power, wind, flaps, or trim. Improper use of power, flaps, and trim to account for the wind. And poor directional control after touchdown. So yeah, you just want to make sure you're not swerving the plane all over the place. All right, and here are my references. Do you have any questions? We can perform this in the plane.